What are you most scared of right now? Fear shows up in all kinds of ways, and most of us either ignore it, fight it, or let it quietly shape our lives. But what if fear isn't the enemy? What if it's actually the invitation? When we resist fear, it controls us. But when we approach it with curiosity, it can guide us toward growth, deeper awareness, and freedom. In this week's episode of Science and Soul, I'm going to introduce you to a framework I call TEAM. The 4 forces that shape your emotional resilience: time, expectations, attachment, and memory. This is not surface level self-help. It is a map to step into your life with more awareness, more intention, and more choice. Because when you understand how fear and trust really work, you get to choose differently, and then you move differently. And I don't know about you, but I find that really exciting. So let's get there together. You ready? Could you do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button below? It's completely free and helps us bring you more episodes of Science and Soul. Now on with the episode. Today's episode is about the roots of emotional resilience. We're going to unpack trust and fear and how they show up in our lives. But most importantly, we're going to offer a framework that will help you navigate these complex emotions, hopefully with a little bit more clarity and a little bit more grace. When we think about our emotions, they're really bucketed into 2 distinct categories: emotions of trust and emotions of fear. And you can think of emotions of fear like shame, insecurity, anger, and jealousy. Emotions of trust are things like growth, optimism, freedom, and love. And these are just examples of some emotions. There are many more. And really, trust and fear and how we interact with these emotions really create conditions for our emotional resilience. When we don't understand how these emotions show up in our life and are unclear on how to interact with them, we will have less emotional resilience. In a previous episode, we stepped through some of the hardest terrain a person can navigate, the landscape of trauma. But healing is not just about repairing what was broken. It's about learning how to move forward without fear as a guiding force. Because fear, whether we realize it or not, is often the silent architect of our lives. It can dictate what we avoid, how we protect ourselves, and often becomes the limiter on our own potential. And, fear can make us small. It can hide us from our true selves. And I think the worst part of fear is that it can make us believe that if we never risk, we'll never be hurt again. But in order to face our fears, we need to accept and embrace a reasonable level of uncertainty. So I thought I'd share a poem I wrote about uncertainty and what this path of learning to trust ourselves actually looks like. And the poem is called Relinquishing. There are many ways to live a beautiful life, but the most difficult reality to bear is that any vista beyond our present life is uncertain. We can allay our anxiety, create an illusion of a destination, but the uncertainty, the not knowing, is perhaps the actual price of beauty. To manage the doubt, we are forced to cultivate integrity within ourselves, admit to seeing what we know is there, accept that we can only feel safe and sure-footed along the path we make for ourselves. The one that oozes from our very own heart propels our earnest pursuit of the truth, and quietly and nobly pushes us to the next most necessary thing. And so the best that we can do within these narrow parameters of being, the best that we can do with this life is to pause, to catch our breath, face the doom and the glory inside our heart, unplotted by our anxious selves, untrodden by anyone else. Only then can we become who we truly are. Only then can we be truly free. So fear is not just the foundation of avoidance, it's often the undercurrent of anger and jealousy and shame and the deep ache of insecurity. And when you look really closely, you will find it's kind of under the surface of nearly every self-imposed limitation. But fear itself is actually not the enemy. It is only limiting if we refuse to get to know it, if we ignore it. Fear is, in its own way, an invitation. It is a signal that we are standing at the threshold of something important, something that requires our attention, our courage, our willingness to see differently. But when we resist fear, it actually controls us. But when we approach it with curiosity, it can guide us toward growth, deeper awareness, and freedom. There's an awesome quote by a renowned American-born Tibetan Buddhist nun, Pema Chödrön. And she says that fear is the natural reaction to moving closer to the truth. I love that so much because I think the more that we understand our fears, the more space we can give to fear's cousin, which is trust. And trust doesn't require us to have all the answers, only to believe in our capacity to face whatever comes up in our life that scares us, right? And I think this is really a novel way of thinking about trust because, you know, when I think about fear, I always think about not having certainty, right? But certainty is an illusion. And trust is actually born from building competency across roles you inhabit in your life. And when you're competent, you have the potential for capacity. And when you have capacity, you're able to step into the unknown and take more risks and move forward despite that uncertainty. And it really allows us to say, I may not know what comes next, but I trust my ability to navigate it. Again, because I'm actively building competency across my roles. I'm able to then step out with, more confidence and trust that I'm going to be able to handle what comes next. But that's not something that happens to you. That's something that you build actively. And I think when we really try to understand fear and trust, we come to recognize that they work in collaboration with our inner architecture, and they truly reshape how we experience the world. Fear and trust will dictate how we measure time, what we expect of ourselves and others, who and what we attach to, and how we remember. And that really brings us to the framework that I want to talk about today. And it's really the kind of the scaffolding around trust and fear. And that is time, expectations, attachment, and memory. And for ease of remembering, it forms a beautiful acronym, TEAM. But these are really the 4 forces of emotional resilience. And they become the levers through which fear and trust exert their influence. These are actually the forces that shape our patterns of thought and emotion. And what's crazy is that this is happening without our awareness. And really what today is about is just to bring this framework to you so you can kind of understand how fear and trust might manifest in your own life, okay, via these levers. Because when we bring them to light and we can examine them with care, they can actually become the very mechanisms that help us navigate these emotions of trust and fear with more precision and more clarity. Okay, so TEAM is not a prescription, but it's a map. And a lot of these episodes that I take you through, I'm not telling you what to do necessarily. I'm telling you, I'm giving you ideas on how to think about things, right? It is really up to you to integrate a lot of these ideas and ways of being in the world in a way that makes sense to you. And in the episode description, I actually I have questions, reflection questions that you can work through that will help you understand how time, expectations, attachments, and memory show up in your life. And, where there might be fear, where there's trust, what you can lean into, what you might need to let go. But I think understanding how these emotions embed themselves into the structure of our life is a really powerful source of insight that moves you closer to a practice rather than just a feeling. Okay, so now we turn to the first force, time. We are all kind of in conversation with time in some way. And I think whether or not that conversation serves us is the question here. A lot of us can be tethered to the past in a way that is really unhealthy, right? We can replay regrets, we can rehearse old wounds, and we can try to rewrite stuff that can't be changed. And so, being stuck in the past is important for us to understand that that's happening to us, and take the time to figure out what part of that story we need to let go. The other aspect is thinking about the future and living just beyond the horizon. And I think a lot of times when our present doesn't feel good, we can convince ourselves that peace and clarity are going to arrive later. When that inbox is empty, or you feel that job security, or you lose the weight, or you find the right person. We can get stuck, just looking ahead in ways that take us out of the moment. And really, I think, the past and the present, and kind of the past and the future, and getting stuck in either one of those places for too long robs us of joy. Because joy is very much found, generally, in the present moment. So I think what's important to understand is that, time is not actually the enemy. And it's not a prison that we need to try to escape. It's something that we are in relationship with. And the better we learn how to navigate it, and how we show up in the present, is really, I think, what allows us to have the healthiest relationship with time. But there's some really cool research that basically highlighted that, and this is probably not surprising, right? But individuals with a balanced time perspective, that is, those who can flexibly shift their focus between the past, the present, and the future, tend to experience greater psychological well-being. And this balance allows for better emotional regulation and adaptability in various life situations. So there's no question that our relationship with time is going to dictate the quality of our life. When we've got these old narratives that continue to show up in our life that are not serving us, that manifests as fear. And there's a real physiological cost to being in a state of fear, right? And in the trauma episode, I spoke about this, right? Like, when we are in a state of fear, we activate the sympathetic branch of our nervous system, the activating branch of our nervous system. And this puts us in kind of like this chronic low-level stress, right? And if this is the only thing in our life that's stressful, well, it might not matter. But generally speaking, we have lots of other types of stress, right? So all of this different types of stress that is not serving us, right, compounds in ways that are maladaptive, right? And this is one of those things, right? Living in the past is generally speaking not adaptive. And the reason for that is because it's keeping us in this kind of low level of kind of chronic stress. So addressing that, confronting it, getting curious about it is really the path. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about rumination. Okay, so we just talked about the past, and indeed we can think about the past, ruminate on the past, but we also can ruminate on things that are happening or haven't even happened yet in the future. And again, this really goes back to understanding what we can control, and what we cannot control, right? And we've talked about this in a previous episode related to autonomy and agency, right? There are certain things in our life that we are not able to directly influence. Understanding what we can influence versus what we cannot influence is such an important skill as a human being, because the stuff that we cannot influence ends up being the things that we end up ruminating on, right? And that is just taking up such important mental, physical, and emotional bandwidth. So you really want to be in a position where you can identify when you're in these various states, okay? When you're not in the present, right? And you need to pull yourself back, right? Because if we're operating in these future and past states for too long, again, that is going to manifest physiologically in a super maladaptive way. So getting us back to the present is a skill, and we can do this through just some mindfulness work, right? When we can, just taking brief moments to kind of pause and recenter yourself. Just literally stepping outside and feeling the sun on your face can be a great strategy. And it's really just almost a reminder to reconnect with the present. And, I think when we consider our interactions with other people, it might be thinking about, all right, what are the things in my life that distract me from the moment, right? So if I have a goal to be, I want to be more present with my children, for example, what conditions do I need to create in order to make that happen, right? I know that my kids will develop better and I'll have a better relationship if I can be present when I have time with them. So it might mean keeping your phone in the other room, like anything that might distract you from being present in the moment, you need to remove, right? So there's lots of really simple things that we can do to create conditions that allow us to stay more in the moment. So really, when you think about the art of like living well, we need to have kind of harmony across these temporal perspectives. Okay, so the past, the present, and the future. And we need to be able to honor our past without getting consumed by it, right? It has an important, I think it serves as an important perspective. And we need to be able to kind of future plan, but not be consumed by it. And most importantly, we need to have the skill of being able to actually immerse ourselves in the present. And, each one of these kind of states has an important place in our life. It's just, again, figuring out what is that healthy relationship and making sure that the time you're spending in the future and in the past is really serving you. So I think that when we get this equilibrium right, it allows us to extract wisdom from our experiences and set meaningful intentions for what lies ahead. And I think most importantly, engage wholeheartedly with the here and the now. Okay, and now for our second force of emotional resilience, expectations. Expectations can act as the lenses through which we perceive both success and failure. They will define what we strive for and how we measure growth and whether or not we allow ourselves to celebrate or suffer, right? And often these expectations are not even our own. We inherited them, right, from family, from culture, and from a lot of the quiet kind of assumptions that follow us, through childhood and settle into our bones and emerge when we're adults, right? And and they are often operating totally unnoticed, but yet they're literally steering our life. They're taking us down a path, whether we like it or not. And sometimes we are like, when we are actually adhering to these kind of silent standards, I should be further along. I must not fail. I have to meet their expectation. These kind of internal scripts that we have adopted over the course of our life actually shape our sense of accomplishment or inadequacy, right? And they are influencing whether we persist or we give up, whether we trust our process or, berate ourselves for, not getting stuff done on time, right? Expectations is it's probably not something that we think a lot about, but the impact of unmanaged expectations is really profound. And the question isn't whether or not we have expectations, right? It is a natural feature of just human existence, right? We all have expectations of what we think is going to happen. And some of those prediction mechanisms really serve us, right? But I think the crucial inquiry here is, are those expectations actually serving us, or are they subtly controlling us? So when we outsource our definition of success, we end up losing touch with what truly drives us. We stop asking, what do I want? What brings me alive? Instead, we become consumed with, what will they think? Am I keeping up? Have I met a standard? And, I don't want to come across as thinking that standards don't matter. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. But I think that when we are constantly looking outward, we lose touch with the self. And I think that's when we move from, or our motivation behind why we're doing what we're doing becomes less clear, right? And this is the dynamic of intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is when, you are truly, authentically motivated by the work that you're doing, versus extrinsic motivation, which is, maybe I'm getting a reward. I'm getting $100 to get an A on the test, right? So it's not really the work that I'm excited about. It's just the fact that I'm getting this reward. And that can be a decent short-term strategy, but that is not a long-term strategy for happiness. And indeed, there's a study published in Frontiers that examined first-year university students and found that those with higher levels of intrinsic motivation reported greater subjective well-being and a stronger sense of meaning in life and better academic performance. So expectations are going to shape more than just our achievements and our setbacks, but they actually will form the way we experience our own lives. So, for example, a person who expects life to be fair is going to be bitter when it's not, right? Or a person who expects relationships to be effortless will be deeply disappointed, right? And feel betrayed because of all the work that a good relationship requires, right? So having expectations and managing those expectations is such a core feature of the human experience. So being really clear on, or at least aware that mapping expectations with reality is a big, I think, piece of psychological health and psychological well-being, right? If we're constantly in a state where we're disappointed because the reality is not matching our expectations, well, that's probably not a reality problem. That is an expectation problem, right? And this is where becoming more conscious of what we're expecting from life, from ourselves, and from others gives us the ability to actually choose differently. We can kind of loosen our grip and let go of some of these old narratives that were not serving us, right? These expectations that we just kind of fell into, but that aren't really our own, and give us an opportunity to really create new ones. And, why does all this matter? Well, it's not about abandoning expectations per se. It's just what we're trying to do with the team framework is really to become more aware of expectations, right? And understand whether those expectations are serving us or are they sabotaging us. I think the other area where expectations can show up in our life is in, when we're trying to heal from a past trauma or, a change in relationship. And I think oftentimes we can expect things to happen on unrealistic timelines. And I think about this a lot in the context of grieving a loved one who's passed or grieving the loss of a love, right? I think society sometimes has expectations, or even family members can have expectations on what those timelines of grief should look like, right? And when we don't meet them, we feel like we're failing, right? And this is where I think we need to take a step back and create our own timelines, right? Based on how we feel. And I think sometimes that those conversations can be hard, or we can feel like something is wrong with us when our expectations for healing, for example, are not lining up with the people around us, right? And this is where being aware of our own timelines becomes really important. So I think at like a high level, when we shift our expectations from, perfection to progress, from destination to process, from external validation to internal alignment, we open, I think, the door to something kind of radical. And that's the ability to actually meet life as it is rather than as we think it should be. And I think what that does to our physiology and psychology is really powerful. When we are, accepting reality kind of on its own terms, all of a sudden we are there for the moment, right? And this is where expectations tie to time, right? A lot of these things are very related. But what this allows us to do ultimately is access these emotions of trust. And that puts us in a very different psychological and physiological position than if we are in this experiencing these emotions of fear, right? So meeting life as it is rather than as we think it should be is one way to really access these emotions of trust. Lately, I've been spending more time thinking about how I communicate science and how I can take something as complex as, say, heart rate variability and translate it in a way that really lands with people. When I was preparing for one of my recent talks, I found myself wanting to make the data I was presenting more intuitive and more visual, more human. And because my show sponsor Fiverr has such a great network of first-class freelancers, I decided I'd lean on one of them to really optimize my presentation. Don't get me wrong, I still spend hours collating and interpreting all the research, but working with Fiverr Designer meant I could take my information and turn it into something that's much more impactful for my audience. If you're an educator, a founder, or someone who wants to level up the way you communicate your ideas, Fiverr can make this incredibly easy just by connecting you with talented freelancers in a matter of hours. Fiverr has 700 service categories to help you with anything that you need, from AI specialists to marketing, product, tax consultants, and many more. Head to Fiverr.com or click the link in the description and use code Kristen for 10% off your first hire. That's Fiverr.com. I've got exciting news to share about the company I work for and our show sponsor, Whoop. We have just launched the all-new Whoop. I have worked at Whoop for 9 years, and I could not be more excited about this generation. It's 7% smaller and now has 14 plus days of battery life. 2 weeks without having to charge this. Whoop medical grade now includes heart screener with on-demand ECG readings, meaning you can check in on your heart at any time and share those results with your doctor. The Whoop app also now includes a brand new feature called HealthSpan. And what HealthSpan does is it basically is an entry point into coaching in that it will show you exactly how your daily habits impact your pace of aging. Whoop is designed to help you improve your performance, longevity, and overall health. Visit join.whoop/science to try out the all-new Whoop and get a free month on me. That's join.whoop/science now. All right, moving on to our third force of emotional resilience, attachments. And this is really about, what we hold on to and what holds on to us. The fact is we are all creatures of connection. Connection is a core psychological need. To be human is actually to attach to people, to ideas, to identities, to outcomes. And we sometimes can hold on to people, ideas, identities, and outcomes, even when they are not serving us. And this is, as you can see, this is kind of a theme, right? Is really being able to discern what narratives are actually serving us and what narratives are not serving us. And, oftentimes, we hold on way too tightly to these patterns just because they're familiar, even though they're actually holding us back. So being able to, very objectively look at and understand, what attachments are actually nourishing to us. Are they anchoring us in belonging and providing meaning, and offering a sense of home in the world? Or, are they really confining us, right? Are they tethering us to an outdated version of ourselves, right? And what happens when we are operating in an outdated version of ourselves, right? We know that it's an identity that's no longer serving us, right? That's going to keep us locked into a cycle of fear, right? And prevent us ultimately from moving on. So the challenge of attachments is definitely not forming them, right? That kind of is the easy part. That's very instinctual. The challenge is actually knowing when to hold on and when to let go. And we often mistake familiarity for safety. We assume that because something has been with us for a really long time, whether it's a relationship, a belief, a way of working, that it should remain, right? But this also creates what we call emotional rigidity. And this is really characterized by inflexible emotional responses. Okay, we know from the literature that is linked to poor mental health outcomes. So being emotionally flexible, right, and being able to discern, what is, creating positive emotions, what is creating negative emotions, and being able to, kind of toggle emotionally is really a feature of poor psychological health. There's a study that was published in the Journal of Affective Disorders that found that individuals exhibiting emotional rigidity were less likely to experience remission from anxiety and depression. And, and this obviously suggests that our ability to flexibly process emotions is really an important feature of the recovery process. And, this idea of discerning, right? Or this idea of discernment is really what allows us to, I think, grow inside of a relationship. And often that is being able to kind of in parallel communicate with a partner and, in terms of like what you need and what you feel like might be holding you back. And, and we've kind of touched on some of this in other episodes, but, when we think about, rigid versus fluid attachments, we really want to have relationships and attachments, ideas, beliefs, people, right? That give us this flexibility, right? And that really is the platform for growth, learning, development, right? So, an attachment is a positive, healthy one, is going to make us feel like we are deeply connected, right? Not trapped, devoted 100%. This doesn't mean that we're not committed to a relationship, okay, or to a thing or idea, right? But we're not dependent on it, right? And we can shift and move fluidly, right? Inside that relationship or that belief or that idea, right? And when we are presented with evidence, we are able to change our mind, right? That's fluid. So when we are able to engage, I think wisely and healthily with an attachment, we create space for freedom, for transformation, for, all of these positive emotions of trust. I think one of the challenges in life is knowing when to let go. It's understanding that some relationships just might not grow and evolve in a way that feels good to you, right? And, oftentimes those relationships that used to bring us joy now bring us exhaustion, right? And it's kind of understanding and being able to kind of look at that through an objective lens. We can also think about this in the context of a job, right? That gave us security, but now we feel like it really stifles our growth. And it can also mean letting go of a person that we once were, right? A version of ourselves that made sense at one point, but now maybe feels too small for us, right? And I think we can tell ourselves stories about why we should stay. Maybe it's because we've invested so much. Maybe because it's not the right time. Maybe it's because things might actually change in the future for the better. But I think I just want to tell you that the feeling that you have in your gut is probably the one that you should trust. A lot of times, like what we cling to rigidly is actually the thing that's holding us down. And then there are some attachments that are absolutely 1,000% worth fighting for, right? And then there's some that should be released, right? And the wisdom is really in knowing the difference. And I think in both cases, like you're going to feel it in your body, right? Your body is going to send you signals, right? And I love how Diego Perez, young Pablo, how he talks about this very concept of kind of rigidity and fluidity. And, and he says that, how do you feel sitting next to the person? Do they calm your nervous system, or do they put you in this activated state, right? Like you will feel in your body generally if it's worth keeping or if it's something that you need to let go. It's the same thing with a job, right? Like, how does it feel in your body, right? To go to work every day, to interact with your colleagues. And you might not be in a position in that very second of a realization that maybe it's not working for you. You might not be able to, in that moment, let go of it, right? But I think connecting that awareness to what's happening internally is, and thinking about it in the context of kind of the theory, is really where that wisdom happens. It's kind of at that intersection. But we have to ask ourselves these questions, and we have to tap into how our body feels. And there's so much wisdom just inside our body, right? That we often become numb to or disconnected. And, and that's what this framework is really offering, I suppose, is not, it's not suggesting to sever all attachments. It's asking us just to examine them, right? In the context of rigid versus fluid. And really at the core understanding, what attachments are grounding us and which ones are restricting us. I think the other aspect to think about, if we're thinking about beliefs, right, is, does the, because a lot of attachments are like kind of our tribe or our political affiliation, right? And I think when I think about, a tribe or a political affiliation, I really look for entities that are interested in the truth. Because I think what can happen when we are inside this tribe is that we have this knee-jerk reaction to kind of go with whatever the tribe says, right? And that might be good and it might serve you, but you also want to be able to look objectively at evidence, right? And I think sometimes this tribal kind of way of thinking ignores evidence, right? It gets really rigid in how they think about, their belief, right? In ways that actually really end up restricting you. So really, fluid attachments are going to allow us to build teams that evolve versus teams that resist change. We think about, our maybe a healing journey. Attachments will determine whether we move toward growth or remain, really tied to past wounds. And, I think in kind of life, attachments will influence whether we feel expansive and can access those beautiful emotions of trust, or if we feel trapped and afraid, right? Emotions of fear. And again, understanding kind of what you're accessing across these attachments, and if you have the if you have the conditions that allow you to operate fluidly or not, is I think one of the more important sources of insight. So now we're going to turn to the final force of the team framework, and this is memory. David White, if you listen to this podcast, you'll know that I'm a huge fan. Just at least in my mind, I'm constantly thinking about different passages he's written, and he has this essay on nostalgia that I just absolutely love. And he writes that nostalgia is not an indulgence in the past, but a reaching back to something essential that has been lost. And this is really what memory does. It doesn't just replay old stories. It actually signals that something within us is asking to be reclaimed. And I think, the past doesn't have to haunt us. And I talked a little bit about this in the trauma episode, where, that's really the work with trauma, is kind of getting to a place where you can come to terms with that memory, in a way that it doesn't, in a way that feels integrated and gives us a rightful place in the story of who we are. So it's really about integrating our memory in a way that serves us. And, I think that this can be a really challenging process at times. And I think what's kind of exciting about memory is that it's not passive. It's really active. It's a living force, right? That, shapes our present and influences our future. And it can call to us, right? And and it can resurface like unexpected moments. And these can come at us in like various forms. But oftentimes it's asking us to kind of pay attention, right? And this is what David White was saying. It's that, it's asking us to maybe reconsider, and to see that past maybe with new eyes. And I suppose when I think about memory, I think it's not that we're like rewriting or making up the past, but who I am today is very different than who I was 5 years ago, right? And my memory of 20 years ago is different because I'm different now, right? And I guess it's okay to for you to have a new perspective on that memory, because this is very much how we make sense of our experiences. So something that like really hurt me 20 years ago, I might 5 years ago really felt that hurt in a profound way. But now I actually look at that hurt as a gift, that it helped me grow in ways that I never would have been able to grow if I hadn't experienced that, right? And that's really where the wisdom kind of takes root, right? It's this unseen thread, stitching together who we were and who we are and, who we're going to become, right? And so I think that there is an opportunity to revisit the past in a way that is really empowering. Now, nostalgia also has a shadow side. I think when we mistake it for a kind of a longing to return rather than to retrieve, we really risk becoming stuck in the past rather than learning from it. And I think about this more in the context of desire. And there's like this awesome quote by Naval Ravikant. He says that desire is a contract you make with yourself to be unhappy until you get what you want. And that's kind of like what like longing feels like, and becoming stuck in the past can feel like, rather than a active attempt to learn from it, right? It becomes this really, it kind of makes you be stuck in this place where you can't actually feel joy. So that's where we really want to make sure that memory is not serving as a trap, but actually is a bridge to something meaningful. Because some memories will actually imprison us, right? They're going to loop endlessly. Okay, we've all been there at one stage of our life, right? Maybe we're grieving a lost love, right? And we're just like looping endlessly and revisiting those memories and looking at old pictures and, the videos that you had together. And that can really keep us tethered to the past in a way that, and the memory that just doesn't really have a place in our life today. Because oftentimes, or sometimes, memory can keep us tethered to old wounds. We can have, unfinished conversations, right? That conversations that we're never going to be able to pick up again, right? But yet we keep playing those conversations in our mind. And that's the stuff that we really need to let go of. Those are memories that, we need to just maybe learn from, but we need to move on. Because those are memories that are not going to anchor us, right? They're not going to remind us what is true. And that's the stuff that we just need to let go of. Okay. Remembering things that we have overcome, right? And the wisdom that we gained by moving through something that was difficult. Like, yeah, those are really empowering memories, right? That we need to revisit every now and again. These memories, I think that call us forward and invite us to reinterpret them, to find meaning in maybe once felt like suffering, and to really use them as stepping stones, I think is when, memories become really adaptive and serve us. So really what we're talking about here are autobiographical memories. And there's some really cool research that shows that these memories and being able to make meaning of them, right, is such plays a really crucial role in constructing and maintaining a positive sense of self. Okay. So this can obviously work in the opposite direction, right? So it's just understanding that, these memories are really important, but we have to think about how these memories are serving us today and whether it's, moving us forward or holding us back. So I think it's just important to recognize that it's not an indulgence to revisit the past. It's actually necessary because when we engage with memory, not as something that's fixed, but as something, constantly to be, shaped and understood, we reclaim the power to bridge the gap between who we were and who we're becoming. So I hope you enjoyed moving through these 4 forces of emotional resilience. The team framework, time, expectations, attachment, and memory. The goal of it really is to offer a kind of more structured but adaptable approach to building trust into your life and recognizing how emotions of trust and fear show up in your life. When we engage with team in an intentional way, we're in a position where we're no longer at the mercy of fear. We can understand it. And when we understand it, we're in a position to step into our lives with more awareness and more intention and choice. And I think that's where, when we really start to embody these emotions of trust, it creates not just an internal shift, but fundamentally changes the way that we move in the world. And I think that's exciting. I get asked quite a lot how I chose my sponsors for Science and Soul. Something that's really important to me is that I work with brands that I use and genuinely love, ones that bring real value into my life. And one of those is our show sponsor, Huel. It's a complete meal in a bottle. And what does that actually mean? Well, it's designed to provide the body with all the nutrients it needs. The product I reach for the most has to be their Black Edition Ready to Drink because it has 35 grams of protein in every bottle, as well as the usual 27 vitamins and minerals that so many Huel products have. It works crazy well with my lifestyle because I can throw it in my bag and have it on the go. It's like having the safety net with me at all times. Even if my day is super busy going from meeting to podcast and everything else, if I drink my Huel, my body will still get the fuel it needs to keep firing. You can get Huel for yourself by using the link in the description. And today, new customers can get my exclusive offer of 15% off and a free gift by visiting my.huel.com/Kristen Holmes and use code Kristen.